As Pastor Rod Parsley said, diminishing the personhood of the few diminishes the personhood of us all. Our definition of personhood communicates the standard by which we expect to be treated. Person does not seem like a complicated word, and it's fair to assume it has a straightforward definition. Some of these definitions include someone who can take part in or play a role in social life, and hence exercise and respect its various rights. Another definition is an individual who is capable of attributing to her own existence some at least basic value, such that being deprived of this existence represents some loss to her. Personhood status, or lack thereof, is currently impacting one societal group more than others: the unborn. While most Americans view abortion as a hot topic in today's society, not everyone understands their own view on it or the consequences of their agenda. Personhood is currently defined by a combination of biological, societal, and legal factors. This presentation will focus specifically on the personhood approach and what implications various definitions of personhood have on a society. Personhood is defined partially by biological factors. Life is scientifically defined as the property or quality that distinguishes living organisms from dead organisms and inanimate matter, manifested in functions such as growth, reproduction, and response to stimuli or adaptation to the environment. Interestingly, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists changed their definition of pregnancy in the 1980s to note the implantation of the human embryo into the mother's uterine wall as the moment when life is formed. This specification allows for IVF, cloning stem cell research, and hormonal birth control devices, while effectively establishing the general opinion that life begins at implantation, a few days after fertilization. Under these definitions, it's clear that allowing abortion to take place weeks, months, or even 9 months after conception and implantation is depriving a living being of its life. If we acknowledge that newborn babies are persons, we have to explain scientifically why late-term fetuses are not. Doctors Giubellini and Minerva argue that there is no difference, biological or otherwise. Therefore, they hold the radical pro-choice view that infanticide is entirely permissible. On the contrary, I propose that we apply their professional opinion on the equality of newborns and fetuses to grant personhood status to prevent both infanticide and abortion. Personhood is also defined by societal ideas. Minimalistic ethics, the principle of non-malfeasance, requires that every being of human origin be considered a person, lest unconditional harm be done to a whole population. Essentially, human life equals human person. Separating these two terms opens a cultural Pandora's box of our view of inalienable rights and who is endowed with them. At present, moral status can be attached to the potential persons by virtue of the value that the mother attaches to it. According to Giubellini and Minerva, whether or not a baby will exist is exactly what our choice is about. But looking at an early stage fetus may or may not trigger an emotional reaction. It's entirely subjective. Justin Buckley Dyer said, "Our emotional sensitivity to physical characteristics is not very rational. It is surely not scientific or grounded in biology. It is a moral feeling about who is equal and who is not." In a similar point, Mary Ann Glendon highlighted the American value of individualism, which is devaluing the family. Americans are rejecting healthy forms of interdependence. Emphasizing individualism renders ever more difficult the existence of those whose lives are inconvenient. Finally, personhood is ultimately granted based on legal components. Dyer compared abortion to American slavery, citing the Fifth Amendment, which prohibits the federal government from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Fifth and 14th Amendments are inherently at odds with the doctrine of substantive due process, which allows courts to protect certain rights from federal government interference, even if they are not explicitly protected elsewhere. Dyer concluded that within the context of federalism, the national government does not have the authority and power to protect the natural rights of citizens at the local level. Instead, it is within the responsibility of the states. Therefore, as established in Roe v. Wade, it is the responsibility of the elected officials of the state of Texas to place restrictions on abortions, not for the purpose of burdening a mother, but saving a child. Granting the fetus personhood could place what some would call an undue burden on the mother, based off of Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which stipulates that a finding of an undue burden is shorthand for the conclusion that a state regulation has the purpose or effect of placing a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion of a non-viable fetus. However, the reality is that if the fetus is a person, then its 14th Amendment freedom from being unjustly killed outweighs the mother's freedom from being unduly burdened. No abortion restrictions require the woman to provide a newborn with a home, family, education, or living, only its right to life. The purpose of the regulations is to protect, not harm. In 1890, Samuel D. Warren and Louis D. Brandy concluded that sometimes the dignity and convenience of the individual must yield to the demands of public welfare. Abortion creates the narrative that some persons are not persons and therefore they are disposable. What positive impact could that mindset have on a society? Some groups in the abortion discussion, even those who side with the pro-life movement, argued that determining personhood is irrelevant to the abortion discussion. The Good Samaritan thesis views carrying a baby to full term as a good deed that a woman may perform, but not one that she is required to undertake. In one iteration of the Good Samaritan thesis, Judith Thompson draws an analogy between a pregnancy and a hypothetical situation in which a person is kidnapped by a musical society and forcibly connected to a famous ailing violinist whose unique kidney condition means that he needs to be connected to that person's body for the next 9 months in order to survive. However, this analogy does not consider that the mother is not simply an innocent bystander. The reason a baby is in the vulnerable position and dependent position it is in is because to some degree the mother is responsible. Once she has brought the human life into existence, the state has the responsibility to protect it under the 14th Amendment. In the case of rape, which only accounts for less than 1% of U.S. abortions, although the mother is not responsible for the conception, inconvenient or even tragic circumstances do not warrant murderous reactions. Another argument against personhood as an effective means of abolishing abortion is the justified homicide thesis. The thesis states that there are times when we justify killing a human. Typically, these reasons are self-defense, whether personal or on behalf of the country in a time of war, or as punishment for a capital crime. The justified homicide thesis says that abortion is simply another scenario in which homicide is unfortunate but necessary and therefore justifiable. However, in all of the aforementioned situations, the persons were killed as a result of their own actions and or when there was no other option. In an abortion, the person is entirely innocent, and, as the abortion advocates emphasize, it is a choice. Therefore, neither the justified homicide thesis nor the Good Samaritan thesis provide enough support against the successfulness of the personhood approach to justify discarding the discussion. In conclusion, personhood is currently defined by a combination of biological, societal, and legal factors. Because the fetus does not change biologically after its birth in a way that justifies granting it new rights that it did not have before, we have the option to ascribe all fetuses and infants personhood status, or none of them. But an attempt to define the preborn as non-persons always leaves another segment of the population vulnerable. The mentally disabled, young children, and comatose patients are immediately at risk of losing their basic right to life. The issue has been examined and re-examined in light of different medical ages, religious doctrines, and societal influences. The fact remains that diminishing the personhood of the few diminishes the personhood of us all. Allowing humans to set a bar of moral dignity is unsustainable and dangerous. How we define personhood dictates how we treat each other and how we allow the government to treat us. Thank you.